Hello, everyone. Um, Today is an interesting day because we are trying something new. Instead of going live through Facebook directly, we are trying a new system where we are going live both on Facebook as well as on our YouTube page at the Girl Scouts of San Gorgonio YouTube page. You might be watching on either one of those platforms, but I can see your comments and I'm able to respond. This actually is a really great system because I'm able to kind of do both of those at the same time. And I actually got a hello from YouTube. Very cool. So I'm excited. This is kind of fun. I like learning new technology. So this is kind of be a fun day. But to get started, hi everyone, it's Windsor here from the Girl Scouts of San Gorgonio Council. And hopefully you're joining me having either watched the live on Wednesday or having read the description. But this month, just as a little background, this month we are doing a bunch of Facebook Lives, or a bunch of lives, I shouldn't even say Facebook anymore, a bunch of lives on the topic of World Thinking Day, which is celebrated every year on February 22nd. And on Wednesday, I did a whole little history about World Thinking Day and gave a little context for what it is, why we celebrate it, and why it's so important to not just Girl Scouts, but Girl Guides, and all the members of the World Association for Girl Scouts and Girl Guides. So I really encourage you to go check that out if you haven't already done so. But for the remainder of this month, our Facebook Lives that will take place on Wednesdays and Fridays, 6 p.m. on Wednesdays and 3 o'clock on Fridays. We are going to be doing a bunch of different Facebook Lives pertaining to not only World Thinking Day, but the World Thinking Day topic of peacebuilding, and different topics related to our place as members of the World Association of Girl Scouts and Girl Guides, and just as human beings and wanting to create peace in our world, especially during this interesting year and weird time. But today I'm going to be talking about brave spaces and safe spaces, and this is really important because about when we're talking about the topic of peace, or anything that we talk about on World Thinking Day. Last year we talked about equity and equality, or the year before that we've talked about different topics have included poverty or education. These are topics that are definitely important, but they can bring up feelings for different members of the group that might be participating, because we're all individuals who have different experiences and different backgrounds, and we might have different feelings about different topics. And so we want to have that dialogue, but we want to have it in a safe way, in a productive way, so that all of the members of the group feel supported and feel like they're in a place where they can engage as fully as they want to. So that's what we're talking about today. I'm just gonna get started about that. So really, you're using a dialogue to create understanding between people with different backgrounds. So when you're in that space, and people have different life expectancies, perspective, and really understanding those different experiences and different perspectives is really key to resolving conflict and building peace. You think about world leaders, whether they're, our representatives in Congress, or you have people who might work in the United Nations, or any place where you're, engaging with people not from, where you grew up, or even the people where you grew up but might be from a different part of town or have a different background than you. You're going, because there's differences, there's going to be some conflict, and there doesn't have to be. So when you think about that and you want to understand it, it's good to create these spaces in order to have those dialogues, so you can work together to build peace and resolve that conflict that might exist. And a lot of the activities that are found in the World Thinking Day packets this year or months from years past, whether it's the Girl Scouts of the United States of America come out with their little packet for World Thinking Day, and a lot of that is based on the packet that is released by the World Association of Girl Scouts and Girl Guides. Or really any activity that your troop or maybe your class in school or any group of people you might do that is involving dialogue on different topics, whether it's diversity, equity, or inclusion, is going to encourage participants to reveal assumptions and perceptions and judgments that they may have, and highlight how all forms of prejudice and discrimination can lead to conflict. So we kind of know that. We know that anytime that someone has a perception about something or have a judgment or a stereotype that they may have in their brain, that is that can lead to conflict, and that's something you want to talk about. But it is important to create a safe space where participants feel like they can be brave, they can get out of their comfort zone, and they can truly hear others' stories and trust others to hear them. So you don't want to feel judged, and other people don't. You don't want to feel judged, and you don't want to judge others. So to create that space where everyone can feel comfortable to do that, to feel vulnerable a little bit, to feel like that, but not feel like they're going to leave that situation feeling like it wasn't equal, or everyone wasn't feeling like some person felt like they were experiencing or feeling like they were sharing more of their judgments and perceptions rather than another person, to make it so that everyone feels like they are participating equally. So that's why we talk about different spaces. So there, you hear words like safe space and brave space, and I think you can read this. I can see it. I don't know if it's flipped, so if it's backward, just let me know, and I can see if I can figure that out. But here I have the difference between safe space and brave space, and sometimes you might think that these are interchangeable words. Some people might use them interchangeably, but I have chosen to go from the sources that I have that I think are pretty reliable, and see them as slightly different spaces. So a safe space generally describes a place that it doesn't incite judgment. It's without pressure to educate others, and it just provides support. So the way I like to think of this is if you go you just want to let off steam. Maybe you go someplace and you just want to talk, just want to express your feelings to others, but they're not going to judge you for your opinions about things. They're not necessarily going to pressure to educate you based on your opinions. That if they disagree with them, they're not going to try to educate you to maybe get you to their, to change your opinion or anything like that. And it's just to provide an emotional support of recognizing that's how you're feeling and that you need to express it in that way. So that's what's considered a safe space. A brave space goes a little bit beyond that, because it does encourage a dialogue. Because when we're talking about things like peace building, we don't want to just share what our own opinions about peace building are, and how it should and shouldn't be done, and just leave it at that without judgment. We want to have that dialogue on maybe recognizes that people have differences and have different experiences, and come to a new understanding. Maybe somebody is sharing something that is new to you, and you want to come together to share each of your experiences, and maybe talk about a way to resolve it. But what that can lead to is some discomfort. So if you're maybe sharing a story about a time where you experienced something that was unpleasant for you, that's going to be unpleasant for you to share, but it might be unpleasant for other people to hear. So it's going to cause a little bit of discomfort, but from that discomfort you can have a really good dialogue with the group, and come to a place where you have some empathy for those people who have shared those experiences. So what you really want is to have a balance of a safe space and a brave space. So they do have, different outcomes, but you really do want to have a balance of both. You want to have a level of discomfort and vulnerability in order to talk about, your own experiences, but you also want to get to a place where people feel safe to express, how they feel, and don't feel like they're going to leave that space, feeling like they, um, didn't get anything out of it other than being vulnerable, if that makes any sense. So if you are the leader of such a discussion, you're the troop leader, or you've been in charge of your troop or a certain activity, or you're the person who's the facilitator of such an activity, you want to consider kind of two things. You want to consider the experiences of all the participants. Of course, you might not know all the experiences of the participants. There are going to be things that you don't know about people, especially if maybe you're doing a World Thinking Day activity with people you've never met before. And that's okay. But you want to kind of consider that beforehand. You don't want to go in assuming that everyone has the same experiences that you do. And that might just be what you need to consider, that everyone's going to have a different experience. You might want to also consider what's going on in the world and your community. Right now we're living in a very interesting time, and that can be said of really any time, but there might be some things happening, tension happening in your community or in the world. There might be things happening in people's homes that you can kind of understand. We all kind of recognize that we're all being influenced by the pandemic right now. We all know that we're all being influenced by things that we hear on the news or things happening around the world. So just be mindful of that, because those are probably going to be topics that people are going to bring up. So kind of be prepared to talk about that. The other thing is understand how to create a safe and brave space. I told you the difference between the two. So, knowing, that they can be different, and, understanding how to create them so that you can, validate each other and to challenge one another in a really great, constructive way. And a good way to do this is to think about a time that you were in a space that felt, where you felt supported, but also challenged. You found that balance, but also, or you were in a place where you were teaching as well as learning. I certainly can think of times where I felt like I was in a place where it wasn't safe, or I felt like perhaps I was being very vulnerable, and instead of feeling that supportive in my vulnerability, instead maybe I was, put down for my opinions, or for, maybe I wasn't as educated on a certain topic as I thought I was. And instead of, having someone be supportive and say, we understand that that's your, experience, have you ever considered this way? Instead, it was more like a putting down. And that left me in that experience having more of a sour taste in my mouth, because I didn't feel supported, and I didn't feel validated, and I didn't feel supported, and didn't get a teaching moment. But I've also had experiences that were the complete opposite, where I've been in spaces where people have been very generous with their time, and, been vulnerable to express their own, opinions and feelings about things, and took the time to educate. So just think about those times that you felt that way, and try to emulate that. And that's always a good thing to do. And hopefully the space that you create is going to be a positive experience for the people who are attending, and they can go off and feel and know how that's supposed to feel in other spaces. And that just creates a ripple effect of creating all these wonderful spaces to have good dialogue. The last thing I have is just some little tips to create a brave space. Obviously, these are not exhaustive. There's definitely a ton of different things that you can do, and find. There's a lot of resources on how to create brave spaces from people who have been doing it for a long time. But these are just the ones that I have found. That are really helpful, and I have 9 of them. And actually, some of these are from the WAG's World Thinking Day packet, and then I've added a couple more that I have found to be helpful. So I'm going to go through these. So the first one is vocally state that the space is safe. the space safety. So, just how I explained, the difference between a safe space and a brave space, it's a really great way to start off doing that in your meeting. And you might even put like a sign like this and explain the differences. Because when you say, oh, well, this is a safe space, that might have a different definition for different people. Don't assume that everyone knows. So you want to vocally state it, but you also want to explain it. Oh, and that goes to my second point. So you also want to explain the difference between a safe space and a brave space, and also state that it is. Number three, you could create guidelines together. So, once you've explained what a brave space or a safe space is, what are some guidelines you want to set? And usually, when you come up with guidelines or rules together as a group, it's usually easier to follow them. Is it easier to just being told what to do and have to follow someone else's rules, or if you come and you create, an agreement together as a group, more likely the group is going to follow them because they created them themselves. And those can be statements like, we're not going to put people down, or we're going to avoid certain types of language, or things like that. And you can come up with those with your group, and they're going to come up with the guidelines that they feel safe with and be able to follow them. Number four, agree on confidentiality. So I've heard some people refer to this as the Las Vegas rule, because, like there's, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That's a different, different, yeah. Basically, the whole idea is that when you're in this space and you're sharing this conversation, whatever is said and discussed, you don't want it to leave that space, because then it becomes gossiping, right? And you might have had a great experience and said, I had a great experience at World Thinking Day. I heard all these amazing stories. And if someone says, well, what was some of the stories? And you go on to tell a story about someone else in your group that might have had, a story about discrimination towards them or something like that, then you're starting to share, that person felt safe in that place and brave to share their story or experiences. But then you're actually breaking that trust by going out and telling it to other people, even if it's well intentioned. So generally, if you're having, a space, whether it's online or in person, you want to keep it within that group. So you want to agree on that confidentiality. So whatever, happens in that space stays in that space, and it doesn't go out. And again, that's something that might be part of your guidelines together. So to agree on that confidentiality and agree why you don't want to go talk about things that happened in the group after it took place. Number five, you want to agree that all voices get heard. This is true a lot of the times when you're with a bunch of different people. Some people are more comfortable talking than others, and that's totally okay, but you want to create a space where everyone has the opportunity to speak. And you might be able to do this by, maybe not just asking people to raise their hand and calling on the people that raise their hand, but do it in a way that's confidential. Maybe you can figure out a way that they can put their answers on slips of paper, maybe, and it's anonymous. Maybe you can figure out a way to write on a board so everyone can share. So do it in a way that make it so people don't feel like all the attention's on them, and that everyone's getting a voice. So that's a good way to make sure that everyone feels heard and you're not getting the same voices over and over again. Number six, adapt the program. So if you find that you're doing your World Thinking Day and you're doing an activity, and that activity goes into a very deep conversation, don't feel like you should have to stop and be like, we only allotted 25 minutes to this activity, now we have to stop so we can go into the next one. Because what's going to end up happening excuse me, is that that you're not going to get that feeling of resolve, and then it doesn't become brave space anymore. So if you are in a conversation, be okay to adapt and kind of continue on with that conversation, because ultimately, and at the end of the day, resolving whatever conversation or whatever dialogue you're having is going to matter a lot more than making sure you get to every single point of your program that you have planned that day. Number seven, avoid generalizations. So generally, you don't want to say, well, we all feel, or, kind of all-encompassing statements, or people from this place feel this, or these type of people have this experience, because that's not going to be true of everyone. So just be mindful of that to avoid generalizations. Number three, plan to support members to speak up or seek support if they don't feel safe, and make it clear to the group. So, for example, if you're talking on a particular subject and it's making someone feel uncomfortable, make it so that it's okay for them to speak up and say that they're uncomfortable. Maybe you have a rule that if they feel uncomfortable at any time, that they're more than welcome to leave their group and sit quietly in the corner, or they are more than welcome, feel triggered in some way in order to process that, or be able to feel like they can talk to you, because sometimes they feel like they need permission in order to talk and speak up for themselves. So just make sure that that's really known in the group. So plan to support them and have a way to support them, and make sure that everyone knows that. And then, of course, number nine kind of goes with number seven, to avoid generalizations, but encourage I statements. So generally, when you're speaking, we as humans tend to kind of use like we statements or I or you statements. So, like if I'm giving an example of like, when you're, when you're eating and this thing happens, or when you're driving, or when this happens, and you're assuming that other people have the same experience that you do. It's better to use an I statement, or say like when I'm driving, or when I'm sleeping, or when I'm eating, because you're concentrating on your own experience. Now, if other people relate to your personal experience, that's great, but you're not automatically just assuming and using a you statement or a we statement. You always want to encourage an I statement. And that makes it so that people don't feel, one, excluded, but also don't feel like people assume that you have shared experience because you're in the same group or something like that. So those are all of my little tips that I have about creating brave spaces. There you go, sharing them all together. But there's always definitely more information that you can find. I encourage you to look at the World Thinking Day packet, both from WAGS and the GSUSA. And of course, there's always so many different resources online. You can definitely look up how to create a brave space, or how to create safe spaces. And the best thing you can do is just talk openly with your group, whether it's your troop or your group of friends, or whoever you're experiencing World Thinking Day with. If you're going and experiencing it with someone else who's facilitating it, be mindful of those things as well, and try to go into it with a really good outset. And if there's anything that I've left out, or any tips that you feel like you have experienced, please put that in the comments. I think it would be helpful for anyone to see. And I hope everyone has a really great thinking day this year and gets to have these really amazing dialogues, even though a lot of it's going to be online. And there are actually some tips as well in the World Thinking Day packet from the World Association of Girl Scouts and Girl Guides on WAGS. On their website, they actually have some tips about how to do World Thinking Day through online virtually. So, that's something that you can think of too, when you're talking about creating, safe spaces, or how to support your members. You have something like chat where they can anonymously chat, not anonymously chat, but like they could chat you directly. So if they have a concern or something, so they're not feeling like they have to go out of the way to talk to whoever's facilitating or something like that. So that's something you want to talk to as well, because of that particular platform. But that is all that I have for today. I feel like I've given a lot of information, and again, at any time I misspoke, I'm trying. I try to be as informed as I possibly can, but sometimes I get it wrong as well. So I apologize for anything that I might have misspoken about. But I hope you have a great rest of your day. It's a Friday. You have a great weekend. Next week, we will have our Facebook Lives, 6 p.m. on Wednesdays, 3 p.m. on Fridays, and we are starting to get all of our, things scheduled. So hopefully a lot of people saw um, the little notification that, was coming up that we were going live. We're going to try to do that more often so people kind of have a forewarning about our lives and a description so you know what you're looking for. But the rest of the month, we are going to be talking again about World Thinking Day. And things related to peace and peace building. So have a great day, and I will see you next week. So goodbye.